The allegations Meghan has made are simply not true. Her account does not reflect what actually happened, and it has led the public to a deeply misleading impression. That version of events has no basis in.
The decision did not arrive with a speech, a warning, or even a public ceremony. It came behind closed doors, carrying consequences powerful enough to redraw the royal family overnight. William had reached the line he was no longer prepared to retreat from. Meghan's Duchess title was being removed, and both she and Harry were being excluded from every future official royal gathering. One signature had transformed a family feud into permanent exile. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William read the final wording twice inside Windsor, as the room tightened around him. The prince knew what he was authorizing. Meghan would no longer be recognized through the Duchess of Sussex styling in active royal life, while she and Harry would lose invitations to official ceremonies, balcony appearances, state occasions, representation duties, and crown-organized gatherings. The Duchess styling was the royal title attached to Meghan after her marriage, and removing it from active palace recognition meant cutting away one of her last formal links to the institution. No advisor interrupted. No one asked him to soften the language. He closed the folder, signed the order, and left the pen across the page. The future king felt no victory. His eyes stopped on Harry's name before he approved the attendance restriction, because this was not only about Meghan. It meant excluding his brother from rooms, traditions, and family rituals that had shaped them both since childhood. Every person present understood that the order was designed to end uncertainty, but they also understood the emotional cost could not be written into any palace file. Across the Atlantic, Meghan opened the communication beside Harry, and slowed when she reached the paragraph concerning her title. Her face visibly hardened. He barely reacted, because he had already moved ahead to the section about future royal events. Then his attention locked on the wording. The exclusion covered more than state ceremonies. It extended to privately organized royal occasions, whenever attendance was tied to crown representation, meaning the separation reached into family spaces he once assumed would always remain open. Harry then noticed something else. The document carried an earlier internal date. William's office had been preparing this mechanism before the Sussexes understood how far the process had advanced. Meghan saw a title being taken away. He saw something more painful. Doors closing to the same world that had raised him. And while the palace could reduce the decision to a few carefully chosen paragraphs, inside two homes separated by an ocean, 4 people were about to confront what those paragraphs had actually destroyed. For Meghan, the blow struck at an identity attached to the most dramatic chapter of her public life. For Harry, it reached somewhere older. Before statements, interviews, grievances, or departures, there had been corridors he knew as a boy, and ceremonies he understood without explanation. Now William's decision forced husband and wife to confront 2 different losses, and behind their shared anger was a painful truth neither could completely experience for the other. Meghan placed the notice on the table and stared at it, as though leaving it untouched might somehow reduce its power. The Duchess designation had remained one of her strongest symbolic connections to royal life long after she stepped away from official duties. A royal styling is the formal title used to identify a person's place within the monarchy. And for her, that name still carried the memory of everything gained, challenged, and eventually abandoned. She had expected pressure over branding, appearances, perhaps even another restriction. She had not expected William to strike directly at the title itself. Harry barely looked at her. His attention remained fixed on the pages describing future attendance. Christmas gatherings, memorials, weddings, jubilees, funerals, military commemorations. Those were not abstract palace events to him. They were fragments of childhood, adulthood, grief, duty, and family history. Meghan finally broke the silence, saying the order proved the palace had always intended to push them out permanently. He did not answer. He kept reading. Back in Britain, William remained inside the same room, long after the formal meeting had ended. The prince asked an aide whether Harry had acknowledged receiving the communication. When told there had been no response, he nodded once and turned away. He had wanted certainty, yet certainty did not feel clean. His brother's silence carried more weight than anger might have done. Meghan's frustration sharpened as she read the language again. She believed the action went beyond setting boundaries, and instead erased the last visible connection she still possessed to the institution. Harry, however, had stopped thinking about the title entirely. Several phrases in the order sounded familiar: responsibility, representation, family membership, royal obligation. He had heard that language before. Then one memory returned with brutal clarity. Months earlier, during a private argument, William had warned that the monarchy could no longer survive what he called halfway membership. At the time, Harry had dismissed the phrase as another hard line spoken in anger. Now those same ideas appeared inside the order sitting before him. That phrase had not been born in a legal office. It had been spoken months earlier, during one private confrontation that everyone involved would later recognize as the point of no return. Long before the signature, there had been one conversation the palace never forgot. It began as an argument over a future family ceremony, and ended with William questioning whether the Sussexes could remain attached to royal privilege while standing outside royal responsibility. The voices never became theatrical. No one stormed across a ballroom. But one sentence from Harry, followed by one cold answer from his brother, hardened a disagreement into a decision that would eventually cross the Atlantic. Harry had spent months pushing back against arrangements that treated every future appearance like a negotiation. Seating plans, security, public positioning, and even the wording of invitations had become points of friction. To him, the issue was deeply personal. He believed stepping away from royal duties should never erase his place beside his father and brother. William saw something different. The prince believed every special accommodation blurred the line between private family membership and active royal representation, creating uncertainty the monarchy could no longer afford. The pressure finally broke during a private planning call about the Windsor Founders Service. The fictional ceremony was intended to bring senior members of the family together for a formal crown occasion, meaning attendance carried more than emotional weight. It also signaled who was publicly recognized as part of the working royal structure. Harry made his position clear. Meghan must be formally recognized through her Duchess styling, and seated with senior royals before they would agree to attend. William went silent. Then the future king answered with a restraint that made the moment colder, not calmer. He told his brother that no one was erasing him from the family, but the crown could not keep reshaping ceremonies around people who had rejected its obligations, while still expecting its privileges. Harry pushed back immediately. He argued that loyalty to family and service to the institution were not the same thing. The call ended without resolution. William remained seated after the line went dead, with no aide beside him, and no one left to soften what had just happened. He pulled the briefing paper closer and wrote one sentence by hand: separate family access from royal status permanently. The words were simple, but they changed everything. What had been months of frustration had now become a policy direction. Harry would not understand the full meaning of that sentence until much later, when the final order reached him in California. Then the wording became impossible to ignore. He recognized the same argument, the same logic, and the same emotional wound buried inside every paragraph. For the first time since the order was signed, the dispute was about to leave the paperwork behind and return to the two brothers whose fractured relationship had created it. There were no cameras, no press secretaries, and no carefully polished statements when Harry finally stood across from William. The argument that had traveled through documents and intermediaries was suddenly reduced to two brothers in one room. Harry wanted one answer. Had William really decided Meghan no longer had a place inside the royal structure? But when the prince responded, the answer went far beyond one woman, one title, or one invitation. Harry entered the small Windsor sitting room, carrying the same document that had already traveled between lawyers, advisors, and royal offices. He had agreed to one condition before the meeting began: no aides would remain once the door closed. William accepted because this was no longer about procedure alone. The meeting had no formal power to reverse the order. It existed because one brother refused to let a permanent decision about family life survive without being spoken aloud between them. Harry pushed the pages across the table. "Look at me and say this is what you wanted." William did not touch the document. The future king held his brother's gaze and answered quietly, "I wanted the uncertainty to end." That sentence landed harder than anger. Harry accused him of turning royal procedure into punishment, of using institutional language to settle personal resentment. The prince rejected that charge. He said every temporary compromise had produced another dispute over access, seating, status, security, and public meaning. William then revealed something Harry had not expected. The internal review had not begun with Meghan alone. It had examined the position of all non-working family members whose titles or appearances could blur the line between private relatives and official representatives of the crown. A non-working royal remains part of the family, but does not carry out regular duties on behalf of the monarch. Yet the Sussex case had become urgent, because no other situation combined royal titles, worldwide attention, and repeated disagreement over participation in major ceremonies. Harry leaned forward and asked the question he had been avoiding. Did Charles know? William hesitated. Then he admitted that their father had seen the final framework and had chosen not to stop it. Harry's anger changed immediately. The fight with his brother was familiar. The thought that the king had watched the process move forward in silence was different. He looked down at the papers, then back at William, as though searching for some sign that the answer might still change. Harry eventually stood without offering forgiveness. He remained convinced that his brother had driven the decision, but now the deeper truth was impossible to ignore. William could only have carried the order this far because someone above him had allowed it to survive. The confrontation exposed the emotion behind the decision, but its authority came from somewhere deeper, inside the machinery of a monarchy preparing for the future before the family itself was ready. William may have pushed the decision forward, but no measure this severe could survive on anger alone. Somewhere between family resentment and royal authority, the prince needed something stronger than personal conviction. He needed the crown to stand behind him. And when Charles was presented with the framework, his most consequential act was not what he said, it was what he refused to prevent. The king's silence gave his heir room to finish what had already begun. Charles read the final briefing without interruption. When he reached Meghan's name, the monarch removed his glasses and placed the file down. The document separated private family identity from active royal participation, meaning someone could remain related to the sovereign while losing the ceremonial access, public role, and official title recognition attached to crown duties. That distinction mattered, because Harry would still be his son, yet the Sussex household would no longer move through royal life as though nothing had changed. The king looked toward the advisor waiting across from him and asked only one question. Did William understand the consequences? He was not asking about headlines. He was asking whether the prince understood that ending uncertainty could also deepen the wound between two brothers. Charles knew a cleaner institution might come at the cost of a colder family. William answered that question himself later. The future king told his father he did not expect Harry to forgive him. and he would not hide behind courtiers if blame followed. Advisors had already suggested a softer option: suspend invitations for a limited period, review the arrangement later, and leave room for reconciliation. He rejected it. Another temporary compromise, he argued, would only delay the next collision over status, access, and public meaning. Charles allowed the framework to stand, but not without one condition. He insisted that the final language preserve Harry's personal place inside the family, even while removing official ceremonial access from the Sussex household. The king would not permit palace policy to declare that his son no longer belonged to him. William accepted the distinction, though both men understood how fragile it would become once real invitations stopped arriving. The consequence appeared almost immediately. Before Harry had even left Britain, planners reviewing an approaching national ceremony removed 2 Sussex placeholders from the guest allocation. No dramatic announcement accompanied the change. 2 names simply disappeared from a working list. That quiet alteration carried more force than any argument. The decision had finally moved beyond signatures and private arguments. Now empty chairs, revised guest lists, and unanswered invitations were about to make the exile visible. A title can disappear inside paperwork. Exile becomes real when someone notices the empty place. As palace calendars were rewritten, the Sussexes began vanishing from the rituals that had once connected them to the royal family. Meghan could argue with the symbolism. Harry could rage against the principle. But neither could ignore the first guest list carrying everyone's names except theirs. And the silence that followed was more brutal than another public confrontation. Meghan saw the seating card online before anyone warned her it had been released. She locked her phone, walked away, then came back minutes later and looked again at the place where her name would once have appeared. The Windsor Founders Service had become more than a ceremony now. It was proof. Palace planners had removed both Sussex names from ceremonial guest lists, official commemorations, family representation schedules, and reserved seating plans, turning a private decision into something visible and undeniable. Harry felt the wound differently. A longtime royal acquaintance sent him a private message describing preparations at Windsor, perhaps intending only to be kind. Instead, the details cut deeper. He still knew where his father would sit, where William would stand, which relatives would arrive first, and how the family would move through the service. The royal calendar was not just institutional memory to him. It was personal history. He ended the exchange abruptly, because every familiar detail reminded him that he now understood the room better than he was permitted to enter it. The restriction hardened behind the scenes. Security teams, household secretaries, and event coordinators received the same instruction. No invitation for Harry or Meghan could be issued unless William and Charles jointly approved an exception. Even private relatives were quietly told that personal relationships remained possible, but official attendance arrangements could not be bypassed through informal invitations. That distinction forced people around the family into uncomfortable choices. Meghan did not respond the way many expected. Instead of preparing an immediate public attack, she told Harry that silence might carry more power. If the palace wanted ownership of the decision, then it should also own every empty chair, every missing name, and every uncomfortable question without pointing to another Sussex statement as the cause. Harry listened, but his anger had already changed shape. He no longer wanted another public argument. He wanted one final private conversation. And this time, he did not ask to see William. The brothers had argued over power. Now Harry wanted to speak to the one man who could still turn the conflict back into something more human, a father facing a son. When Harry finally sat alone with Charles, there was no constitutional language left to hide behind. No aides entered, no briefing papers were placed between them. The son who had spent years fighting an institution was now speaking only to his father, and the king who had permitted the exile could no longer answer as merely the monarch. What followed did not reverse William's decision. Instead, it forced both men to admit something far harder. Some relationships survive even when their old form does not. Harry did not begin with Meghan's title. He did not ask for a reversal, a new statement, or another negotiation. He asked one question instead. Did his father truly want him absent from future family milestones? Charles sat with the weight of it before answering. The monarch told his son that he wanted him in his life, but he could no longer promise that every private family moment could continue to carry the meaning of an official royal occasion. That distinction mattered, because royal events are not only family gatherings, they also represent the crown publicly, and every appearance can signal status, duty, and institutional approval. Harry lowered his voice. Losing access, he admitted, hurt more than losing status. The restrictions made him feel as though his childhood had been placed behind a locked door. Christmases, memorials, ceremonies, corridors, familiar rooms. Those memories still belonged to him, yet the places connected to them now seemed guarded by rules he could no longer influence. Charles listened without interrupting. For once, the king did not defend procedure. The father answered instead. Personal meetings would remain possible. Private visits would remain possible. Direct contact would remain possible. The official restrictions would stand, but the relationship did not have to disappear with them. Charles could not restore the old arrangement, yet he refused to accept that royal separation had to become personal abandonment. Harry stayed silent for a long moment. Then something shifted. He told his father he would not ask him to overrule William. The words did not sound like forgiveness, and Charles did not treat them as such. But for the first time, the fight stopped moving toward another confrontation. The son was no longer demanding that the institution bend. The father was no longer pretending the old family structure could be restored. Outside that private understanding, however, the world knew nothing of the change. Inside the room, anger had softened into painful acceptance. Outside it, the story was about to explode across front pages, television studios, and the gates of Windsor. By sunrise, the family's private fracture belonged to everyone. Broadcasters abandoned scheduled segments. Commentators argued over whether William had protected the crown or crossed an unforgivable line. Supporters of the Sussexes called it humiliation. Defenders of the palace called it final clarity. But one image captured the entire morning more powerfully than any debate. Outside Windsor Castle, people stood beneath phones displaying the same extraordinary headline. Meghan stripped, Sussexes excluded, William unmoved. William watched the reaction from Windsor without speaking. Television panels called the decision ruthless, decisive, necessary, and cruel within the same hour. An aide reached for the remote, but the prince quietly told them to leave it on. The public announcement had confirmed that Meghan would no longer be recognized through the Duchess styling in official royal contexts, and that the Sussex household would no longer participate in formal crown events. Those events are occasions where members of the family appear on behalf of the monarchy itself, so exclusion meant more than missing celebrations. It meant losing a visible place inside the institution. Across the Atlantic, Meghan faced a different kind of pressure. Advisors prepared possible statements, while phones filled with requests for reaction, but she refused to issue one. Harry supported the silence. That choice marked a sharp break from earlier battles, when every new palace move seemed to produce another answer. This time they decided the royal family would have to carry the public weight of its own decision, without another Sussex response becoming the story. Outside Windsor, the argument became physical. A fictional morning edition of the Chronicle carried William's photograph beneath the headline, "The Royal Line is Drawn." Copies rose above a small crowd gathered near Henry Vyde's gate, as broadcasters reported live. Some people called the move overdue. Others described it as punishment, disguised as order. The division was immediate, because the public was no longer debating a private disagreement. It was watching the monarchy choose a side. William kept listening. No senior royal stepped forward to criticize him. Charles remained silent. The wider family held the same line. For the first time in the long Sussex conflict, the future king had achieved something the palace had repeatedly failed to maintain. One internal position, with no visible fracture behind it. Yet the headlines could only measure shock. They could not decide what the decision had actually cost William, Harry, Meghan, or Charles. When the cameras finally moved on, what remained was not a headline, but a permanent change in 4 lives. And the emotional price of drawing a boundary no one could pretend was temporary. In the end, William got exactly what he demanded: clarity. Meghan no longer occupied the uncertain space between former working royal and active royal symbol. Harry no longer had to wonder whether the next invitation might restore what the previous argument had broken. Charles no longer attempted to hold 2 incompatible versions of family life together. Yet clarity carried its own cruelty. The monarchy became more orderly, but the family paid for that order with something no proclamation could ever restore. Meghan folded the original palace notice and placed it away, instead of tearing it apart. The gesture carried no triumph, but it also carried no surrender. The Duchess styling had once connected her publicly to royal life, yet active recognition of that identity was now gone, and the Sussexes remained outside official ceremonies and crown-organized events. She understood what that meant. The chapter attached to that title had ended, whether she approved of the ending or not. Harry reached his own decision quietly. He told Meghan he would stop fighting for ceremonial access. If contact with Charles or William survived, it would happen because father, son, and brother chose one another privately, not because another invitation arrived with a crest at the top. The distinction was painful, but it finally gave him something the endless negotiations never had: an answer. William felt the cost during the first major ceremony held without them. The prince paused briefly as the family prepared to leave, and noticed the absence without saying a word. He had protected the boundary he believed the monarchy needed, but there was no satisfaction in seeing that boundary become real. Institutional stability had been achieved. Family unity had not. Charles accepted that truth last. The king kept his promise that private relationships would not be forbidden, yet he stopped trying to rebuild the royal arrangement that existed before the Sussex departure. Harry remained his son. William remained his brother. Meghan remained part of the wider family story. But those relationships now lived outside formal royal participation, where affection could survive without pretending the old structure still existed. No one had truly won. William created clarity, but inherited the burden of enforcing it. Meghan lost the royal identity she had continued to carry. Harry lost formal access to the world that raised him. Charles accepted the limits of reconciliation. The crown emerged more defined, more controlled, and less uncertain, but also less whole. There would be no restored title, no dramatic return to the balcony, and no last-minute reversal. William had drawn the line. Harry had stopped trying to cross it. Meghan had turned away from the identity it represented, and Charles had accepted that love could survive without royal unity. The Sussex chapter inside the working monarchy was over, not because the family stopped feeling, but because feeling was no longer enough to hold the crown together. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.